Hello there and welcome to another edition of the Social Gambler Radio Hour. I'm John Arnette. Good to have you with me today. Monday afternoon, clouds starting to build up here in St. Augustine. Maybe you're on your way home from work. Had quite a weekend. A lot going on, lots to talk about today. Figured we'd lead the show off with the historic collapse, Adam Scott's historic collapse at Royal Lytham in St. Anne's yesterday. But I feel compelled to start with the news of the day, at least the news of the day in this country, and that is the NCAA dropping the boom on the Penn State football program. Penn State will now be irrelevant for years and years, maybe decades. Heard somebody saying that they may never recover, and that may be the case. I don't think these penalties are going to stretch far beyond 4 years. You've probably heard the penalties by now. If not, I'll give them to you right now. The NCAA slapped Penn State with a $60 million fine, a 4-year bowl ban. By the way, they're the first school since 1960 to be banned from bowl games for 4 years. A 4-year bowl ban. They have to vacate all wins from 1998 to 2011, which is the least significant of the penalties. That's just a sort of punish Joe Paterno's legacy thing. I'll get into that here in a minute. The most significant in terms of on the field, the thing that's going to have the biggest change in the actual football team at Penn State is a 4-year scholarship production. 10 scholarships initially, going to be 20 total per year. So in a couple of years, Penn State is going to be playing with 65 scholarship players as opposed to everybody else who gets 85. And for those of you who say, well, 65 is still plenty, that is going to cripple this team. Because the only reason the Alabamas and Floridas and Texases of the world, maybe Florida and Texas, are bad teams to use because they weren't very good last year, and neither one of them are going to be very good this year. But you know what I'm saying, the major traditional powers, the only reason they're good year in and year out is because in college football you're allowed so many players. 85 scholarship players now, used to be even more. And so a team like Alabama or LSU, they'll stock their roster, 85 kids, all of them 5-star or 4-star type talent. You might have one or two sort of 3-star sneak in there, or, a coach's son type thing. But, invariably a lot of these kids don't pan out. Many of them just aren't as good as people thought they were. A lot of them have academic problems. But, when you have 85 kids who are all good coming out of high school, that's how you become Alabama or LSU, a traditional power, year in and year out. Because if you're, Johnny 5-star from Dothan, Alabama, and you get offered a scholarship from University of Alabama, it doesn't matter to you that there are already 4 or 5-star running backs there. You don't want to go play for, South Alabama. You don't want to go play in some sort of lesser league. You want to do what you dreamed about since you were a kid. Go play big-time football for the school you've always loved. So Penn State, they're going to be affected by that now, and that's going to last for a long time. Not just through those 4 years that they'll actually have the reduction, but they're going to be so bad, the product on the field, they're going to be a laughingstock in terms of on the field. 2-10, 3-9, that type of team in 4 or 5 years. And who's going to want to come to a school that is terrible, worst team in the conference? Still sort of jokes are made about child molestation. You think their rivals in the Big Ten are going to just let all that stuff go? Penn State, the effects are going to be felt for decades of today's ruling. And also something that hasn't been talked about as much but could have an immediate negative effect on the Penn State program. Every single player who is on scholarship at Penn State, that means everybody currently on the team and everybody in the incoming recruiting class, every single player is going to be allowed to transfer anywhere they want to go. They'll be able to play immediately. And the NCAA has announced that even if a school is has maximum amount of scholarships already used. Like, Alabama, for example, they've already used their 85 scholarships. The NCAA is going to let them have more than the maximum just so long as they correct it over the coming years. In other words, if a school already has 85 scholarships and they decide to take on 3 Penn State players, their 3 best players, well, that's fine. They can have 88 scholarships, but the following year, because the rule states you're allowed 25 scholarships per year, 85 overall. So the following year, since they took on 3 Penn State players, they only have 22 scholarships instead of 25. So, hey, Penn State hasn't been a juggernaut these last few years, but they've got some quality football players there, some future NFL football players. And I'm sure there's going to be a core group of guys, sort of seniors, upperclassmen, who try to keep everybody together. But if you don't think there are going to be defections, you better think again. I mean, their kids who even now, as we speak, are talking to their friends, their teammates at Penn State saying, oh, yeah, man, we've got to keep this thing together. We've got to stay here. But then as the reality in the coming days sort of sets in, no more bowl games for me. No more national exposure that way. Team's going to sort of be in a decline. And you could go anywhere. I mean, now you don't just have to go to someplace that has room for you. You can go anywhere that wants you. So if you're one of Penn State's better players, a top-shelf guy, how about if you're Robert Bolden, quarterback Robert Bolden, who is a 5-star all-everything recruit, has sort of been platooning with Mike McQuarrie at quarterback for the last couple of years. New coach Bill O'Brien announced in the spring that McQuarrie was going to go into camp as a starter. You think Rob Bolden's sticking around? And believe me, there are a lot of teams who will take him on their roster. Hasn't really developed as a passer, but he can sure run. He would sure look good in that offense Urban Meyer's going to run at Ohio State, Penn State's Big Ten rival. Of course, Ohio State already has a good young quarterback, Braxton Miller, but my point is, a lot of Penn State's better players are going to leave. A lot of their big-time incoming recruits are going to leave. They're not going to be allowed to have as many players as everybody else for the next several years. They're in big trouble. And, Joe Paterno's statue taken down in a rush Sunday morning. Can you remember an athlete? I guess O.J. Simpson. I was thinking about this before. O.J. Simpson, maybe the only person involved in athletics that I can remember, period, whose legacy has been so affected, so immediately affected and just turned on its head. I mean, O.J. Simpson, of course, we all remember, was a popular guy. Starred in movies, starred in those Hertz TV commercials, a commentator, seemed likable. The country's opinion on him changed. And I'm not even sure. I mean, this Joe Paterno situation, as far as I'm concerned, is even more drastic. Because this guy was the example in college football. The pillar of integrity and doing things the right way. And in hindsight now, he's an example of when you place too much emphasis on the wrong things. Things that you think are important, that people, educators, teachers call themselves educators. Everybody likes to build up the importance of what they do. Everybody does. It's just you ask a bartender what he does. If you just meet him somewhere, he'll tell you he manages a bar at a restaurant. You know what I mean? Everybody tries to build up what it is they do. And a lot of times teachers, people involved in the teaching profession, they get, and we've heard this a lot with Joe Paterno, him being called, even though he wasn't a teacher, he was a coach, but an educator. Educators doing the most important things. Well, the most important thing is making sure, we turn out good individuals in society. I mean, protecting children. Making sure we're turning in children to, the type of leaders who can propel us to a better society. Whether that involves going to class and getting degrees, that's debatable. Plenty of people have been plenty successful who didn't care for going to class, don't have college degrees. And when people talk about Joe Paterno and how he did things the right way, that's what they're talking about, graduating players. He made players go to class. He graduated a higher percentage of players than other people. So what? That is so meaningless compared to what we found out that Joe Paterno not turned a blind eye to, basically sanctioned, allowed this guy to hang around the university, bring young boys around. So Joe Paterno, we held him up, at a certain place. In a way, we as society are to blame for calling something like making people going to class important. You know what? That's not really important. In the grand scheme of things, what we're seeing now, 45 kids. Sandusky's been convicted of 45. Who knows how many more? I mean, obviously there are more. Who knows how many more in the Penn State football complex? Because all this, you think he just started in 1998? No. And Joe Paterno, when you talk about his legacy, I think most Penn State fans today are very upset at this whole situation, still like Joe Paterno. I think you'll find many more Joe Paterno defenders saying, hey, this is just some guy who did this. Joe had no control over it. Joe did things the right way. Graduated players. You'll still find a lot of that amongst the Penn State fan base. What about 30 years from now? What about the Penn State fan who's being born today, or who will be born tomorrow, who will never have experienced for one day the so-called glory days of Joe Paterno? I say so-called. Hey, he was the winningest coach in college football history, but these last 10 years haven't all been great. So there's been a little bit of decline in Penn State's football program, maybe not quite as steep as the end of the Bobby Bowden years for Florida State. But there was a decline in how good Penn State was in terms of on the field. But the kid who's born tomorrow who has never experienced the winning Penn State, because Penn State, they're about to occupy the losers column. They're going to be losers for a long time. These sanctions are going to cripple the program for a decade or more. And just the accusation, just the air of how gross this all is. I mean, hey, listen, if you're a big-time high school athlete, in 5 and 8 years, these guys, Joe Paterno, that's ancient history. These guys aren't going to care about what Joe Paterno had. As a matter of fact, if you try to recruit these guys in 6 or 8 years based on, hey, we had great tradition way back when Joe Paterno was coach, they're liable to make a Joe Paterno joke, say, oh, yeah, that great tradition. Better watch out if you're a 10-year-old boy, or something like that. So the impact is going to be felt far beyond the next few years. So, I believe for the next 20, 30 years, Penn State is going to be a losing doormat football program. Their days of relevance at a national level are done. And so there'll still be Penn State fans because there'll still be people going to the university. So in 30 years, the 30-year-old Penn State fan, the guy who was born today, how will he view Joe Paterno? We know now that the Penn State fans still like and admire Joe Paterno. Will Penn State fans in 30, 40 years, has his legacy changed so completely that even amongst Penn State fans, after the passage of time, he'll be reviled? Because, Penn State, they're going to become like Northwestern, like Vanderbilt. I shouldn't say like Northwestern. Pat Fitzgerald's doing a decent job there. The Wildcats have been more competitive. They now spread it out, throw it all over the field, but probably shouldn't say Vanderbilt either. James Franklin doing a nice job with Vanderbilt. But you get my point. Duke, the perennial doormat of the conference, that's going to be Penn State. And their fans and their alumni, in 30 years, they're going to be joking about that. In 30 years, the 25-year-old Penn State fan is going to be like, oh, we're awful again. And they're going to trace it back to this day, today, July 23rd, 2012. Just like the SMU program has a very specific date where they can trace back why they haven't been relevant in 25 years. And will that guy at that point say, this guy Paterno, not only do we have to endure these child molesting jokes from our buddies who went to Michigan and Ohio State, calling us the boy lovers and whatnot at Penn State, not only do we have to endure that, but because of this guy, we get hit with these sanctions. Our team's terrible. Joe Paterno, even amongst the Penn State family, he might have changed his legacy so completely that he might be hated. This guy could be a hated figure in all of sports in a few years. We'll see. We'll see. They say time heals all wounds. We'll see what time does to this wound. Because as Penn State is bad and worse every year on the football field, as their program wallows in, I was going to say mediocrity, but they're not going to be that good. They're not going to be good enough to be called mediocre. It's going to be like this wound is open continually. Anyway, the only part of these sanctions that I just think are silly, this vacating wins part. Okay, what they've done is they've stripped Penn State of all their victories from 1998 to 2011. Now, 1998 was the first time that it became known. We actually have documents, documented proof, emails, phone calls, that the Penn State administration knew Jerry Sandusky was molesting boys on campus. So they knew that in 98. We know they do that in 98. Who knows how many years before that they knew that? I mean, Joe Paterno could have just known that was part of Sandusky's deal. That would explain a lot about his behavior sort of for the last 10 or 15 years. But 98 is the first traceable date that we know they knew about this. So the NCAA decided from 1998 to 2011, strip Penn State of all their wins. That is 112 wins. That knocks Joe Paterno down from first all-time major college coaching victories all the way down to 8th. He now has 298. Now, Bobby Bowden, who has obviously a lot of fans in this area, is now first all-time. You know, Bowden and Paterno had that race for so many years, and then it seemed to be done because Bowden had to vacate wins for that sort of tutor scandal, the academic cheating scandal, which now appears laughably mild in comparison. But Bobby Bowden still has 377 credited wins. He is the all-time leader. Yesterday he said, quote, earlier today, he said, quote, "I wish I could have earned it, but that's the way it is." End quote. Sure, we can all picture Bobby Bowden saying that. But to me, anytime you vacate wins, I don't know. The result was decided on the field. You know, a win's a win. And when wins have been vacated in the past, I thought sort of the leg they had to stand on was, well, you were playing ineligible players. Like when USC's wins were vacated, that's because Reggie Bush was ineligible. When Bobby Bowden had to vacate those wins, it was because the players who the NCAA had deemed had cheated were playing in those games. So you had ineligible players playing in those games, players that should have been ineligible. But there's nothing like that here. There's nobody actually on the field who was ever accused of any impropriety. And so to me, you know, obviously I know it's a direct attack on the legacy of Joe Paterno, which I guess, you know, it's fine to pile on Joe Paterno now. He is dead, but it appears as though he was harboring a child molester or worse. Harboring at the best. So piling on Joe Paterno, an acceptable thing to do. NCAA certainly did that. Maybe overstepping their bounds. I know some people think they did that. Certainly unprecedented, bypassing the Committee of Infractions. Most of these things are always handled through the Committee of Infractions. Mark Emmert, NCAA president, releasing a statement explaining why they bypassed the Committee on Infractions. He said, quote, "We cannot look to NCAA history to determine how to handle circumstances so disturbing, shocking, and disappointing." End quote. Mark Emmert, NCAA president. And we can all agree with him. Certainly, this sort of beyond the pale in terms of disturbing, shocking, and disappointing. And so maybe something like stripping wins was called for. I wholeheartedly agree with the rest of the penalties. $60 million fine, 4-year bowl ban, 4-year scholarship reduction, crippling the program, allowing all players to transfer immediately. The vacating wins part, I don't really get that. It's not like they had any players out there who were later deemed ineligible. I don't know. Anyway, we do have to go to a quick break now. When we come back, we'll be moving on to some other things in the sporting world. Thrilling British Open finish, thrilling and disgusting British Open finish. We'll also get into some NFL, maybe some Olympic basketball a little later. 794-9001, the number if you'd like to get in on the other side. I'm John Arnette, and this is the Social Gambler Radio Hour. Nothing says... Welcome back to the Social Gambler Radio Hour. I'm John Arnette. Good to have you with us today. 794-9001, the number if you'd like to join the program. Your calls are always welcome. 794-9001. We are brought to you by thesocialgambler.com, your leader in free sports picks, news, and reviews. All the news and information you could want in the sports world, the sports gambling world, gambling technology, the gaming industry, as well as free sports picks, can all be found on The Social Gambler. And don't forget, they're not only a website, they're also an app for your smartphone, so be sure to check them out. Everything is entirely free. They're a free app, The Social Gambler. Video podcast of this program now on thesocialgambler.com. So there's that. We're going to move on from this Penn State business now. I think we spent enough time on it. You know, it's Pete's favorite subject. Every day I come in here, he requests that we talk a little bit more about Jerry Sandusky and what's happened to the Penn State situation. Uncle Jerry, as Pete refers to him. Anyway, though, I would like to talk a little golf because I was glued to the television set for most of yesterday, watching just about all that coverage, aside from 10 to 11 when, of course, we were on the air. But aside from that little patch, watched the rest of it. And actually, you know, a situation where I was in a TV where I was watching it while I was on the air, so I remember at some point, if you were listening on 1010XL, you might have heard it, but at some point I was rattling off about some football thought right in mid-thought, and Tiger Woods left one in the bunker, and I just cut off and I said, oh, Tiger left one in the bunker. You know. Anyway, a historic collapse, a historic choke at Lytham and St. Anne's yesterday. In the last 30 years, there are only two incidents that we can put in the same class in terms of golf and choking. That would be Greg Norman in the 96 Masters and Jean Van der Velde in the British Open several years ago. Now, both of those, and the reason, you know, there have been chokes of varying degrees since then. Colin Montgomery had a terrible one that year. The year Phil Mickelson also had a chance to win and hit one out of play, had a chance to win the U.S. Open. Jeff Ogilvy ended up coming out on top. But if you remember Montgomery, all he had to do was make par from the fairway with a mid-iron, and, you know. But those, when you have a huge lead, when it is in hand, you know, the outcome appears to have been decided, and you blow it, you know, that is the height of choking. And if you don't think, and what we mean by choke, I mean, it's easy to say. What we mean by that is, due to the moment, due to the circumstance, a player or an athlete performs differently than they would otherwise or had been before. I mean, if you let it get to you, if you can't perform under the pressure, that's what we mean by choking. Choking sounds cruel, but that's exactly what that was yesterday. Read an interesting thing on thesocialgambler.com earlier today entitled Anatomy of a Choke, where Mitchell Mancini, one of their contributors, sort of breaks down hole by hole and shot by shot that painful choke that unfolded. It's kind of amusing. He was comparing Adam Scott to the Wizard of Oz character, the Tin Man, the man without a heart, hollow on the inside. And you saw Scott, you might not have seen it. It was hard to catch on the regular camera shot, but if you've seen, you know, on the Golf Channel and whatnot last night, they reshowed it from several different angles. And you can see after Scott missed that par putt on 18, and he crouched down, and he turned his head away just for a moment. It looked like his lip quivered, and I thought he about lost it. He got a hold of himself, but you know, he was so stoic all day, but he just let it crack for 1 second there, and, you know, can you blame him? What happened? A 4-shot lead standing on the 15th fairway. Makes bogey on 15, you know, poor iron shot into the bunker. So what? Still has a 3-shot lead, 16th, one of the easiest holes out there. Hits a wedge 35 feet past the hole. Hits his lag putt up there 2.5 feet, and then cold pulls a putt from 2.5 feet. And let me tell you, I know that the long putter has revived Adam Scott's career. I get it. I know that he really was never contending in majors before he started using a long putter. He almost won a Masters a couple years ago, almost won a British Open yesterday. He looks more comfortable with the long putter. Yeah, I agree with that. I think he does look more comfortable with the long putter. However, everybody, and this is why it's almost, I play golf, I enjoy golf. It's almost painful when you see someone bringing out a long putter, because that is the public admission that, hey, everybody, at some point, I have been a really, really bad putter. Because nobody starts out with a long putter when they're a kid. And all of the best putters you can think of, when you say, hey, great putters last 20 years, you can start rolling off guys like Ben Crenshaw and Brad Faxon and Lauren Roberts, and those guys all putt with a standard putter, standard length putter. Tiger Woods, standard length putter. Now, Tiger's putting certainly has suffered these last couple of years, but he was certainly one of the great putters in the world. Has been throughout most of his career. So, Adam Scott, that wasn't his first 2.5-footer he's ever missed in a big situation on 16. If it was, he wouldn't be using that big old broom. Now, he does seem to putt well with that broom, and it had been working for him all week. Still, the pull on 16. And then in 17 fairway, when Els birdied 18 to go 7 under, and Adam Scott was then only one shot ahead, still, this is a guy with the picture-perfect swing, picture-perfect mechanics. This is a guy who has been on the PGA Tour since he was 19 years old. He's now 32. People thought he would have won multiple majors by now with his swing and his game, but you find out on 17, he's got a routine iron shot, something that's been ho-hum all day, and he somehow hits a pull hook left into the hay. This is a guy who had not been making swings like that until 1 on 15, 1 on 17. When the heat was turning up, he was shrinking away. Obviously not able to make that par on 17. Drove it in the bunker on 18. It looked like it was done. Then when the pressure was off, when it looked like he'd already choked it away, he was able to hit a good iron shot on 18. Of course, pressure crept back up on him with that putt. Even though I will say it did look like he hit a good putt. Looked like he thought he'd made it. But only Van de Velde and Greg Norman. To me, this is of that significance. But, Ernie Els, you got to hand it to Ernie Els, and nobody's talked about it. I haven't talked about it until right now. I started talking about this British Open and led off with what a choke it was, because when you're watching it, you couldn't help, but even Els felt that way. He apologized a couple of times to Adam Scott as he was accepting his trophy. But Els did shoot 4 under par on that backside. He was 3 under turning. Made birdie on 10 to go to 4. Capped it with a birdie on 18 to finish 7. So 4 under on the backside. That is the tougher of the two sides at Royal Lytham. So similar to Nick Faldo. When Nick Faldo won the Masters in '96, the big story was Greg Norman choking. Nobody paid attention to that bogey-free 67 that Faldo shot. So, hey, give Ernie Els his due. A lot of people, myself included, thought that the days of Ernie Els winning a major were done. This is a guy who, he's 40th in the world ranking now. Still a world-class player, but in his 40s, seems like his best days are behind him. Doesn't regularly contend in majors anymore, at least not over the last couple of years. Maybe this will, he's certainly not too old to play great golf. We saw Vijay Singh, the prime of his career was in his mid-40s. So maybe this will sort of kick off a second chapter in the career of Ernie Els. Be interesting to see. Now, speaking of long putters, Ernie Els himself was using a long putter yesterday, and Els had won 3 majors with a conventional length putter. Els, of course, using a belly putter, not the same type of putter as Adam Scott. Els was using one that was anchored to his midsection, which has become quite popular, these days on tour. As a matter of fact, for many years, these long putters have been around for 30 years, more. For many, many years, a long putter had never won a major. A player using a long putter, a putter longer than standard length, had never won a major. And that was always, anytime sort of someone argued for the merits of a long putter, people always said, well, the best players in the world aren't using it. One's never won a major. Now, a big reason that has been the case is because, as I said earlier, someone only switches to a long putter if they're really having trouble. They must be really struggling putting the ball. A great putter doesn't all of a sudden say, hey, you know what, even though I putt great, maybe I'll change the entire style of putter I'm using. Or at least they haven't in the past. What we're starting to see today, and I heard a spokesman from the RNA interview, the RNA, of course, Royal and Ancient, runs the Open Championship. And I heard someone from the RNA speak about it after the round yesterday, right after the round. Because now, after so long of never seeing a major champion using a long putter, 3 out of the last 4 major champions now have used long putters. Ernie Els, and even if he hadn't won, Adam Scott used a long putter too. Webb Simpson in the U.S. Open, Keegan Bradley in last year's PGA. All used longer than standard length putters. Now, I thought it was extremely interesting. The gentleman from the RNA yesterday said that they were going to make a decision within the next few months as to whether these putters were going to remain legal. I have a sneaking suspicion that in a couple of years you won't be seeing anyone using long putters. I think they're going to be made illegal, and the reason I think golf's governing bodies are leaning towards making them that way is because of what this guy from the RNA said. He said increasingly today we're seeing people who are good putters switching to anchor-style putters because they feel it gives them an advantage. And that's true. These belly putters, Webb Simpson and Keegan Bradley, these were not guys who had trouble putting before switching to these putters. At least that wasn't their reputation. But a lot of people think something you can sort of anchor to your body makes it simpler and easier and gives you a little bit of an advantage over the rest of the guys, over guys who are not using that. So these putters, we might have seen the last major champion using a long putter. I find it hard to believe they're going to be able to implement something for this year's PGA. But I've been hearing this for a couple of years now, that golf's governing bodies may be leaning towards making these putters illegal. And after hearing the guy from the RNA, and the funny thing is, Ernie Els had always used a conventional length putter for his entire career. And hey, it's worked out pretty well for him. Got a private jet. He'd won 3 majors, now has won 4 majors. But Ernie Els said this past October, because he'd been very vocal about calling this cheating. But this past October, Ernie Els said, well, if everybody else is going to do it, if the rest of these guys are going to cheat, and he actually used the word cheat, I'll do it too. So Ernie Els, in his words, cheating by using the belly putter. I'm sure he could kiss that belly putter this morning. And funny thing is, he didn't make a lot of putts. If you're watching him throughout the week, Els had a lot of putts slide by. As a matter of fact, through 3 rounds, Els was one of the guys where you could have said if a few more putts had fallen, he'd be right there. And that seemed to be the story with him really throughout the last decade. But he gets one yesterday. Adam Scott just folding. A grotesque choke. Whew. And fortunately for Adam Scott, I believe his permanent residence is now in this country. I believe he lives in the Orlando area. I could be wrong on that. But at least in this country, the national news today is dominated by this Penn State scandal. It's really pushed his Adam Scott choke down to the back pages. Worldwide, I'm sure that's not the case. It's not the case in Australia, where he's from, or in the UK where this event took place. But Adam Scott, whoa. You had to feel for him, but, it's compelling television to see somebody just unravel like that. Golf's one of the few sports, since there's no teammates to rely on, you can't pass the ball and play defense. You're really exposed. You're really hung out there in golf. There's no opponent hitting shots by you. No one else someone can give the credit to. No one else, if you're playing tennis, another individual sport, and you falter a little bit, someone can say, well, be sure to give the credit to his opponent for making those shots so difficult, for putting him in that position. Not in golf. That ball's not moving. It's just sitting there waiting on you. Adam Scott, nobody to blame but himself. Anyway, we do have to go to another quick break now. 794-9001, the number if you'd like to get in on the other side. I'm John Arnette, and this is the Social Gambler Radio Hour. Welcome back to the Social Gambler Radio Hour. I'm John Arnette. Good to have you with us today. 794-9001, the number if you'd like to join the program. Your calls are always welcome, 794-9001. We are brought to you by thesocialgambler.com, your leader in free sports picks, news, and reviews. If you're not listening to us on ESPN 1420 St. Augustine, we can be heard via the Listen Live link on thesocialgambler.com. Or you can pick us up on the TuneIn Radio app, so you can hear us around the world. Residents of Northeast Florida, I've told you before, you get your free advice from the Social Gambler, the only place in the area where you can legally act on that advice. The only legal sportsbook in the area can be found at the Jacks or Better Casino. The Jacks or Better is, of course, the casino ship. It sails 9 times weekly out of Mayport. Full Vegas action, smoking level, non-smoking level, outdoor area up top. Anytime you go out to the Jacks or Better, mention this radio show, the Social Gambler Radio Hour, and they'll give you $10 free play. That's right, just for mentioning this radio show, the Social Gambler Radio Hour, they'll give you $10. You can use same as cash anywhere in the casino. An exceptional deal. Be sure to check them out at the Jacks or Better Casino. Folks, we are here. It doesn't feel like we're here, because the news cycle is still dominated by, well, this Penn State business. British Open yesterday. I was thinking, that British Open was such a historic collapse. I was thinking you'd have to lead the show with that, but after the Penn State business. But the time has actually come. NFL football time has come. That's right, training camps around the NFL begin this week, including right here in Jacksonville. All players required to report to camp on Thursday. Most camp practices for the first week and a half, anyway, will be open to the public this coming Thursday through next Sunday. Practices begin at 8:30 a.m. most mornings, and those are open to the public. So if you want to go out there, support the Jags, sweat a little bit with them, see them getting some work in, these next couple of weeks are a good time to do that. Now, we've talked about on the show before, over these last couple of weeks, Jags fans, and I am one of them, we can't be more ready for this season to start. Been a bad off season. Lots of negative stories. One still hovering over the team's head. The fact that their best player appears as though he's going to be a training camp holdout, and who knows? Maybe Maurice Jones-Drew is going to hold out some games, some regular season games. I've made my feelings clear on that. I think they should pay the man. I think most people are on the other side and think Maurice Jones-Drew's in the wrong here. Either way, I think everybody, all Jaguar fans, can agree that we need this guy on the field if we're to have a prayer of being a playoff team this year. Another guy we need on the field is our first-round draft pick, 5th overall, Justin Blackmon. Now, out of all that's happened on this offseason, nearly everything is negative. You could go to the Maurice Jones-Drew situation. You could go to the Shad Khan in the city situation. The city apparently trying to terminate the Jaguars' lease and leading to a very public letter. You can go to the Terrence Knighton arrest. You can go to the Justin Blackmon arrest. You can go to the failure to acquire Tim Tebow. There's been a lot of stories this offseason that aren't positive about the Jacksonville Jaguars. The one ray of light, at least until, a bucket of water was dumped on it by the drafting of a punter in the 3rd round and then Justin Blackmon's subsequent arrest. But Justin Blackmon's drafting in the 1st round, everybody who I know who's a Jaguar fan, everybody here in the area, was extremely pleased and surprised by that pick. Don't think many people saw it coming. Everybody's extremely happy. That's been the only good thing in this offseason, the only thing a Jaguar fan can say, hey, that was unexpected, that's nice. And if you don't have him on the field at the beginning of training camp, I mean, and it's getting, it should be getting less complicated now. He should be getting slotted in there because today, the man who was picked right behind him, Morris Claiborne, cornerback for LSU, who was picked 6th by the Dallas Cowboys, he signed today with Dallas. Claiborne signed a 4-year deal with $16.26 million, all guaranteed. And that's going to be the sticking point there. Because the Jaguars, since Blackman has DUI arrest a couple of months ago, his second DUI arrest, the Jaguars want to put some language in there making Blackman's contract not fully guaranteed. Now, after this latest collective bargaining agreement, the rookie wage scale has changed drastically, so these guys aren't making as much money as rookies were making 2 or 3 years ago. But teams are able now to put language in the contracts of these high draft picks that guarantees their contract, make sure they'll get all that money. Jaguars trying not to do that with Justin Blackman, but if they succeed in not being able, that's going to mean Justin Blackman's going to sign what? A worse contract than the guy who was picked behind him? Justin Blackman's agent is going to try to make sure that doesn't happen because he doesn't want to look bad. The agent wants to be able to sign more players. So, it's not only Justin Blackman here. The agent has a vested interest in making sure Justin Blackman has a good-looking contract. And now that we know sort of the parameters they're dealing with, now that the guy right behind him has been given $16.26 million over 4 years, Blackman's got to get something better than that. So even if there is language that says it's not guaranteed, to me it's got to be for more money, and then fairly substantially more money, But we'll see if that gets done. We'll see if that gets done before Thursday. Blackman, the second highest pick to remain unsigned. Fourth pick, Matt Khalil, offensive tackle who was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, is unsigned as well. Now, of course, over the next couple of days, we'll be talking a lot of NFL, getting into training camps around the league as training camps open around the league. A lot more Jaguar talk. Another thing that we'll be talking about some here in the coming days, even though it's not a usual topic of conversation, but the Olympics. The Olympics start in about 5 days. Opening ceremony, I believe, is in 5 days. And I'm not a huge Olympics guy. I'm not going to sit down here and break down the shot put. I'm not going to act like I know what's going on there, but there are several Olympic sports, several summer Olympic sports that I am interested in. And I think certainly like a lot of people, topping the list of those sports is basketball. Now, Olympic basketball doesn't interest me as much as, say, the NBA playoffs, but I'll watch Olympic basketball, and I enjoy seeing the Americans toy with the rest of the field. Even though these last, 10 years or so, the international teams have caught up, and we were reminded yesterday, I actually think it was technically the day before yesterday, but basically yesterday, we were reminded again, these international teams have caught up. This latest dream team, this latest American dream team, who people last week were saying might be better than the original 92 dream team, this squad that includes Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, Darren Williams, a real honor roll. Did I even mention LeBron James? I don't believe I did. I think I went Kobe Bryant right to Kevin Durant. So LeBron James, a lot of people were saying this team was historically great. Well, I'll tell you what. They squeaked by Argentina. I saw a lot of that game, and the part of it I saw, Argentina was clearly the better team on the floor. Now, the part of it I didn't see, apparently the United States opened the game on like a 19-2 run. They were up like 19-2. They ended up winning the game 86-80. And I saw a lot of the middle of that game and towards the end. And what I saw, Argentina was the better team. They appeared to have more outside shooters. Appeared to be playing more disciplined. The American Dream Team sort of looked like the Miami Heat look. Not that that's a bad thing. Heat, of course, were NBA champions, but you know what I mean by that? It seems like they sort of just relied on their athleticism. Prone to taking some bad long jumpers. They didn't seem like a crisp unit. And Argentina did. As a matter of fact, I'm telling you, I was watching it. Argentina would have won this game if their best player, Manu Ginobili, hadn't had to sit out for large parts of the second half with foul trouble. Ginobili, I mean, they were knocking on the door, Argentina was. They had it down to 4 inside of 2 minutes left. And again, Ginobili on the bench for a lot of that time. Now, of course, Argentina, this is not obscure guys. I mean, they have some excellent NBA players on their roster. Guys like Ginobili, like Luis Scola, Thiago Splitter, Carlos Delfino. Guys who play well and play well in the NBA. But for fans or for those on the team itself who thought that it was going to be a cakewalk this year for the USA basketball team, you better think again. Because it still appears as though, even though they have this, they've reconstructed, USA basketball over the last few years, hired Mike Krzyzewski to coach the national team, and they now do this, it's a complete operation where they have a USA select team, and they all practice with each other every offseason, trying to make it more like other countries with the continuity and the teamwork. Still doesn't look quite like other countries. Still looks a little more like the USA tries to play sort of isolation type basketball, rely on your athleticism, sort of one guy being the hero, pulling up from 23 feet, And some of these other teams, Argentina yesterday, look more like, say, the San Antonio Spurs look. Disciplined, they know what each other are doing, they have an idea where each offensive set is going. That's just the outside perception. And Argentina, they're not even supposed to be the second best team. They're not even supposed to be the biggest threat. That would be Spain. The Spanish team, they have one clear advantage over the USA, and it's not a small advantage. That would be the front court. The Spanish team is going to be able to push around this American Olympic team. The American Olympic team is extremely small. The only two actual big men, true front court players they have on the roster are Tyson Chandler and Kevin Love. That's it. Unless you consider guys like Kevin Durant and Carmelo Anthony front court players, which they're not. Those guys are perimeter players, perimeter scorers. Kevin Love and Tyson Chandler are the only true big men on the American roster. And Spain's starting front line, the Gasol brothers, Pau Gasol and Marc Gasol. And, Pau Gasol is a bigger version, Marc Gasol, because nearly everybody's familiar with Pau. But for those of you who don't follow the NBA closely, Marc Gasol, a physical center for the Memphis Grizzlies, a bigger, rougher version of Pau, maybe not quite as skilled offensively, but he's a double-double guy in the NBA. So the Gasol brothers and Serge Ibaka is Spain's front court. Ibaka, of course, is the best shot blocker in the league. Plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So they'll have a clear matchup advantage. I mean, and they got some good guards. Rudy Fernandez, they have some NBA quality guards on that Spanish team too. After seeing the Americans in action against Argentina, I am not convinced that it's just going to be a cakewalk to the gold medal. And I'll tell you what, when I look at the odds, the betting odds, the Americans a minus 500 favorite. That means you have to risk $500 to win $100 or $5,000 to risk $1,000. Spain is plus 500, means you get 5 to 1 on your money. Argentina plus 600. I'm not sure that Spain or Argentina, I'm not sure one of those teams isn't a good bet. Maybe a $100 bet on each team. I mean, you don't want to be betting against your country in all things the Olympics. But after watching that game yesterday, when Argentina outplayed that American team for most of the game, those odds seem a little out of whack to me. Anyway, we'll see. Maybe it'll just be a wake-up call for the American squad. Now, another news, sort of NFL news that I wanted to mention here. We got a couple of minutes left in the show. Don't know if you saw Chad Ochocinco has legally changed his name back to Chad Johnson. And I guess people actually care about this because, hey, we're bringing it to you. Ochocinco is really sort of faded from relevance on the NFL landscape. Has a chance for a fresh start now with the Miami Dolphins. We'll see if that works out. At one time, one of the best wide receivers in the league. That time was years ago. For Ochocinco just to be now I should call him, He's not Ocho Cinco anymore. And it took me a while to call him Ocho Cinco anyway. You know, his name's Chad Johnson. That's the name his mother gave him. But we respect everyone's rights here on the Social Gambler Radio Hour. So if you'd like to be called Ocho Cinco, I will call you that. However, no longer. He is Chad Johnson. Now, another wide receiver-related news around the NFL. News people in this area might be interested in. Louis Murphy, former Florida Gator, was on that last Gator National Championship team. Beat Oklahoma, the Urban Meyer Tim Tebow team. Louis Murphy had a really nice start to his NFL career. You know, chosen in the 4th round in 2009 by the Oakland Raiders. In his first 2 seasons, Murphy proved to be the most reliable receiver on the Raiders roster. He was a better receiver than first-round pick Darius Hayward-Bay. Caught 75 balls for 1,130 yards, 6 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons. And he did that for an offense. You know, Oakland's passing offense has been anemic. At least they were until last year when they acquired Carson Palmer. Murphy was bothered with injuries last year. Only caught 15 balls, 241 yards, missed most of the season. I believe it was a groin that gave him trouble. Anyway, the Raiders have traded Louis Murphy today to the Carolina Panthers for an undisclosed draft pick. Undisclosed means really late, by the way. So the Raiders do have some depth at wide receiver. So, you know, Denarius Moore, Hayward Bay, Jacoby Ford, I mean, they've got some wide receivers, so I guess they felt Murphy was expendable. This gives Cam Newton another weapon out there in Carolina. Murphy might not be the big playmaker like a Steve Smith, but he's certainly extremely reliable, a useful NFL player. A lot of people think Carolina is going to take a big step forward this year. I'm not so sure about that.
For ESPN Radio and Mike and Mike.
Anyway, that was the promo. I guess that does mean we're out of time for today. Pete's saying we have 10 seconds left. Glad you've joined us. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 for more of the Social Gambler Radio Hour.